Good morning, everybody. I'm really happy to be with you this morning. This is one of my favorite topics, so I'm delighted to be with you and talk about this. And I have a couple of good stories to tell, and then I'm going to share what, from my perspective and from some of the best research out there, what employee engagement is all about, and maybe how we begin to rethink it a little bit. So let's start with a really great story. And the overview today is keep it simple, which I'm sure maybe is why you're here, because we've gotten pretty complicated with employee engagement and with numbers and statistics, and everybody gets their reports and everybody does their, well, let's talk about that. Let's see what we can do with that. I'm not saying that it needs to go away, but let's talk about what engagement is really about, and let's get back to the root of how we have an impact on it. Today in the story, I'm going to tell you about our values and engagement at PacificSource. We're quite an extraordinary organization. We've been around a long time, and this is one of my favorite stories to tell. I'd like to share a little bit about what life is really like at PacificSource from an engagement perspective. And then let's go into some knowledge. Let's go into some of the behavioral research that is available. Let's look at just what can we know together, and then we'll move on and say, and what do we do about that? And top 5 drivers. Those are out there. Some of the best CEB behavioral research will tell us what the top 5 drivers are for managers and for employees, and where we can begin to reset and say, how do we engage our managers and employees, and then how do we succeed? So let's do it. So let me tell you a story about this great organization called PacificSource that I get to go to every day and do my job, as well as about 1,000 other people. And we have these things called values, and this won't surprise you because I'll bet you have values, you have principles, and they're on the wall and that sort of thing. Well, the interesting thing about PacificSource, when I first joined PacificSource, you know, in a lot of places, and maybe in your organization, you put these kinds of things on the wall, and then sometimes we really live them, and then other times we forget, which is why we put them on the wall, maybe. But what's interesting about PacificSource is we actually don't put these on the wall, which may sound funny to you. We actually really live these, and I'll give you a couple of examples. So the first week that I was with PacificSource, we had, you may remember, some weather, pretty extreme weather last winter. And it just kept coming, and it was coming in every part of our, we were in 3 states, it was in every state. We had questions of how we assist employees, make sure everyone's safe and get to work. And the very first thing I heard when I went into the meeting is, what is the right thing to do right now for our employees? And I just remember thinking, because I just come from employee orientation, you know, and I was feeling pretty good, and I'm really excited to be at PacificSource, but we really did this, and that's the difference. So we have a CEO who's quite extraordinary. He lives these values. He was the catalyst behind coming up a lot of these. Let me show you another one. We are one team working toward a common goal. This is not an unusual one. We are one team working toward a common goal. Sometimes when we get offside in our process, sometimes the thing that brings us back together is this value. We are one team working toward a common goal. Now, it may sometimes sound like a platitude, but in fact, even our top, the senior executive that I work for, will ask in our one-on-ones, do you really believe we're working as one team? And then I go back with my teams, and then we get to work. So it's always a place where we go back and we're actively engaging around not only the language, but around the idea and the intention of it. We are each responsible for customer service. We have something at PacificSource called I Live the Values Awards. And this is a real thing. This is something where your peer-to-peer can nominate anyone in the organization for living any one of these values. And what it requires is that you have to tell the story about what really happened with specifics, and then it's reviewed. And I get to do that. One of the really cool things I get to do in my job, and I get to read these great stories about what our employees are doing, but it's called an I Live the Values Award. And if you're nominated and it's selected, then our CEO then gets engaged. We celebrate you at a quarterly meeting, and then you get a surprise, which I won't reveal just in case there are any PacificSource employees who haven't been nominated yet, that arrives in a handwritten note from me. So we'll leave it at that. But here's the thing about this. The focus on it often, when I see the values that are selected as people are nominating each other, is around customer service, because this is often what we notice in each other. We say, wow, you really should have seen how somebody showed up and helped out and did that extra, which, by the way, I'm going to talk about in a little bit, and it's called discretionary effort. We don't have to use all of that language, but I do want to point out in employee engagement research, that's a piece of language you're going to hear a lot. But in our world, we call it customer service, because that's what it is, extraordinary customer service. Here's another one of our values. We practice open communication at all levels of the company to foster individual, team, and company growth. It's not unusual that our CEO, Ken, will send out an email, and with great detail, he tells us what's going on. He gives us an update. And we all get that email from Ken directly. It's not sent down the chain, sometimes it's called. He sends it out to all of us with no filter. We actively participate in efforts to improve our communities, internal and external, and this is a great example. We really believe in what we're doing. We work very, very hard every day to provide personal contact for our customers and for our clients and all of you who are members of PacificSource. And both internally and externally, we are very actively involved. And this is a great example. We share what we know. We want to help everybody be better in what they do. We encourage creativity, innovation, and the pursuit of excellence. I'll show you in just a second. When I brought we do our own employee engagement survey, and when I brought the results to Ken and to the senior team, and I'll show you the results, which are pretty exciting to me, having been in this kind of work for 20 years. And the question was, that's fantastic. What's the gap between where we are now and where we could be? And I'll show you in just a second, and maybe you'll chuckle with me, because we're at a very high percentage of engagement. It's real. So here we are. So this is based on the 17 survey that we ran, based on the activity throughout 2016. We came out at, we had a participation rate, let's just start there for just a second, at 85% of 1,000 employees. So just let that sit with you for a second. I mean, normally the participation rate we're going to see in an organization our size or bigger would be about 35 to 40% at most. So we have an 85% participation rate. There were no hidden incentives. This was just purely, what is it like to work here? And will you please tell us about it? And so that was our participation rate. That's a big deal when it comes to engagement, because it makes the results more valid, as you might imagine. So we had an increase of 15% from 2015. Our PacificSource overall results are almost 82%, 81.7%, which was almost a 10% increase from the year before. And then our overall department results also were going up. So we were watching both for, did the whole organization move, and then did all of the departments move? And in both cases, the answer was yes. So when I brought these results, as someone who came from a larger organization with a, I thought, pretty exciting, participation rate of 45%. The engagement score was in the 70s, which is very high if you compare nationally. And I brought this 81.7, and I don't know, I may have, done a hoot hoot. I was pretty excited about this. And the question was, the first reaction was very thoughtful. Fantastic, great to see. And the second question was, wow, I wonder what that gap is. I wonder what that gap is from 81.7 to 100. What else do our employees need, was the question that I got. So you can hear in the intention of conversations, it's always present. Okay, so that's one of the first stories I wanted to tell you. And I speak genuinely from my mind and heart about that one. I really love where I work, and I'm happy to share that story with you. Well, let's talk about why some of that works and why it's working. But let's go on and more broadly, let's get a baseline of what our knowledge is that we can just know together, and then we can jump off of this and say, and then what do we do? So here's the knowledge. So what's interesting is, with all the scores out there and all the things we do, the hundreds of companies, probably thousands now, who offer employee engagement surveys and results and analytics, This actually came from CEB, which many of you may be members of. What is employee engagement? Let's just get back to brass tacks and real life, and what does it feel like to be an employee who is engaged? And I might even just ask you for a moment to sit for a second and say, what does it feel like if somebody said to you, are you highly engaged? What would you think of? So think of that for just a second. CEB asked employees, and they did a survey, and it was approximately 5,000 employees, and here's what they said, and here's the tag cloud that's going to start to show up. So the first thing that you can see in this tag cloud, the biggest words, are morale, loyalty, and teamwork. That won't surprise you, I'm sure. But the question is, how do we get to that? How do we get to a higher level of morale? How do we get to a high level of loyalty and teamwork? Because this translates into engagement. This is what engagement is. Some other people said, and this is an interesting one because we're going to talk a little bit more about this, it's if employees are looking for other jobs. I'd say that's disengagement, but it's within the category of engagement. Yeah, it definitely is. Yep. Okay, so that's our first baseline of knowledge. So we kind of, from real employees, this is what they're telling us that employee engagement is. It's when they feel involved, it's when they care about their jobs, it's whether employees want to work here. I'd add another one that in behavioral research is on engagement is well known, which is, would you refer a friend, a real good friend, to come and work for where you work? I think that's one of the truest measures of whether engagement is high, and you can check it within yourself and for yourself. Now here's a definition, so we're going to get kind of languagey, but we'll move away from this because we really want to talk about what we're going to do about it. But let's get our baseline. So here's the definition of engagement when you get out into the field of people who study this and provide numbers and that sort of thing. Engagement is the extent to which employees commit both rationally and emotionally to something or someone in the organization. So this means it could be that in your organization, many years ago I worked at Nike, and often in the first couple years people would say, I love working for the brand. They were saying, I love working for the idea of who we are, the swoosh and the just do it, and that is being committed to something in the organization. It was such a big brand that people were so excited to be there. And over time, if they stayed, it would shift to that they were excited to be working and be loyal and committed to someone, usually their manager. But at first they were pulled in by the brand. Now not everybody's a Nike, and that's okay. It could be that you do it the other way around. Often we recruit people in and they have a good relationship with someone, and that's the someone they're committed to. And that's an important relationship to preserve and think about. So here's some more knowledge about engagement that we know that's out in the engagement research field. Engagement is how hard employees work and how long they stay as a result of that commitment. So how hard employees work. Well, what does that mean? We'll talk about that in just a second. That discretionary effort idea, that's where this starts to come in. Given the combination of their past experiences, their present events, and expectations about the future, and when we talk about the top 5 drivers for employees, you're going to hear a lot about this one. This drivers' expectations about the future, and that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody wants to move up or wants to have a promotional forward path, but it does mean that they have some sense about what their future is with the organization, which is different. So career pathing is a little different than what we're talking about here. We'll talk about that in a second. Okay, what else can we know about this? Engagement is a spectrum. So let me show you something really interesting. So when you think about highly engaged employees, what do you think of? Well, you may think of the person who is offers to do extra, is often without this, the research-based language. People may say, oh, it's that person who walks in and says good morning to everybody and wants to know what we're doing, and if they're in a customer service role, knows what the strategy is for the company, highly engaged. Like, you could ask them anything and they'll help you. Those are the kinds of things you'll hear if we were just to say, how would you describe a highly engaged employee? What's interesting is when you look at the research, this is what it says about highly engaged, which is completely aligned with that, just a little bit different language. We find that with highly engaged employees, they take responsibility for their own engagement, which means they ask questions. If they don't know the answer to what is our company about and what is our strategy about, they're going to go ask. They aren't going to wait for it to be presented. They don't wait around for their organization to engage them. This is particularly with millennials, which we may be experiencing. I think with the boomers, those of us who are boomers, we've probably been taught in the protocol that we wouldn't walk directly to the CEO's office and walk right in and say, hey, I have a couple questions. But our millennials are growing up in a different world, and it's not unusual that they would do this. And in fact, if they haven't been engaged within the first week, we've had employees who start at PacificSource, and Ken is delightful and welcomes them, and they walk into Ken and say, hey, I've got a couple questions for you. And he's a terrific guy, and he answers them. But highly engaged employees don't wait for the organization to engage them. They engage themselves in the first week wouldn't be an understatement. Feel the least entitled. This is huge. As managers and as people who think about the whole organization, this is something probably in my role I have a couple things I'm responsible for, and one of them is human resources and learning development, or a couple things, and so feeling the least entitled. So think about that for just a second. Often when you're a manager and somebody says, gosh, if you could just move me to that other cube, or gosh, if you could just give me a little more money, I'd be more engaged. They don't say it that way, but what they're saying, or I won't go look for another job, or gee, I'm thinking about looking for another job, and so if you could just do these couple things for me. And I'd like you to stop and think for just a second, do you think that will work? Usually not. Usually not. When it's those kinds of things that are being asked for because people, or we're seeing, believe it or not, people who are struggling in performance, and then we somehow are saying, oh, but please don't go, let me give you more money or move you to a better office, we see that within 6 months usually they have moved on anyway. And what you've also created as a ripple effect is disengagement from others who pick up on that something's happening that isn't quite right. Okay, so but highly engaged usually feel the least entitled. They're the ones who don't ask for raises, who don't ask for promotions, but magically seem to be promoted and do well in an organization. And there's more to that. Encourage customers. So our highly engaged employees encourage customers. You know, this is our employee who walks in the morning, and even if they've had a bit of a bad morning, walk in the morning, see a customer maybe waiting, and one of our receptionists, who's just terrific, Tanya, at our Springfield location, maybe just does dual duty. She's not right there for a second, and our employee will stop as they walk in with their hands full and a cup of coffee and say, may I help you? Could I help you find your way? Or who were you here to visit? That's a highly engaged employee. They encourage our customers. They go out of their way to make sure that they're attended to and responded to. Highly engaged employees remain highly engaged almost anywhere. So think of somebody who is really highly engaged, and you see them outside of the workplace, maybe at a rodeo or a farmer's market, and what do you think they're doing? Well, our highly engaged employee, it's very likely, is highly engaged wherever you run into them. So if they're at the farmer's market, they're going to tell you about a meal they're about to make, and they've got to pick up 7 ingredients. They have to be just like this. Or if they're at the rodeo, they're going to tell you that all the stats, and they're really excited to see the next person. Highly engaged. You get the feeling. Okay. So they're highly engaged wherever they are. They're fun to run into and hear what they're up to. Let's talk about moderately engaged. And as we go into moderately engaged, I'd ask you the question, then I'll quickly answer it, which you already know the answer to. Do we want everyone to be highly engaged? Oh gosh, no. That would be exhausting. I mean, you know, so, but also realistically, any one of us who is highly engaged might also go through a period of moderately engaged or passively engaged. And that's because lots of life is happening. So we want all three. And we're always going to have some who are actively disengaged, and we'll talk about that. Okay, so what's moderately engaged? I'll go quickly through these and not go on every point with this one, but they possess positive attitudes. They're a core part of our team. They engage in productive behaviors. They're not fully invested in terms of commitment and significant discretionary effort. They're not your folks who are going to say, gosh, can I do extra or can I help you out? But they're dependable. They're moderately engaged, and that's predominantly most of our workforce in most cases, moderately and passively engaged. And we need them, and we're delighted that they're here. And, you know, just to make it real, for any of you who've been moderately engaged or passively engaged in your life, I don't know about you, but I had a small daughter who now is 19 and left for Costa Rica this morning at 3 a.m. and to spend 3 months working on a farm. And, you know, when she was a little girl, and I was working, I was probably right about here. I was moderately engaged because I was tired a lot, and it didn't mean I didn't love the company or didn't want to be there. It meant that I was just had a very full life and was doing the very best I could, and I couldn't probably offer much discretionary effort because I had to get to daycare to pick up Gabby. So, you know, I just couldn't necessarily offer some extra all the time. Okay, so moderately engaged, so passively engaged. This is interesting because what I'm going to suggest to you is this is where we're coming into a line where we want to be aware of our folks who are passively engaged. They come to work, our employees, and they go through the motions without any particular interest. And this could be for a number of reasons. But they don't necessarily create a positive environment for innovation and progress, but that doesn't mean it's bad. So I wouldn't even want to engage the words good and bad in this because it doesn't apply. What I'd say is these are folks who maybe have been with us for 25 years and they love their job. In fact, if you ask them, they love their job. They come in and they do their job every day. They're not necessarily interested in innovation and progress, but they're proud of the work they do and they do a really good job at it. That could be a passively engaged employee, and that's okay. Okay, actively disengaged. Let's talk about this. So here is what an actively disengaged employee they found say about how they feel at work. So the first one is that they feel disconnected from their jobs. And the thing I'd add on to this, because I had to abbreviate, you know, for PowerPoint, is no matter what you do to try to help connect them. Okay, so what I really want you to get a hold of is that our actively disengaged employees, sometimes we really work hard to engage them. And what I would suggest to you is let's engage them in engaging themselves. Because often when we try to solve it for them, it doesn't make a bit of difference. Actively disengaged employees tend to be unsatisfied at work. Unsatisfied at work. You know, in the years that I've done this work, the most active people who communicate with me sometimes and want me to engage on something about something that they're dissatisfied with contact me the most frequently opposed to a highly engaged employee. Highly engaged, I have to go out and check in with them. They're busy, they're engaged, they're in meetings, they're doing stuff. And if they want a partner, they'll come and engage with me. But it's interesting because this is going to be probably counterintuitive a little bit, but they are highly connected with people who can make decisions and checking in and saying, can I get some help? Could I get some extra money? Can I get a promotion? Could I move my cubicle? So maybe reevaluate. Doesn't mean that everybody who does that isn't highly disengaged, but it's not uncommon that you might find that actually they're just highly disengaged. They're trying to find something to solve it. Highly actively disengaged are usually have poor attitudes and emotions that spread through the company. So have you ever been on a team where it might be somebody who's even appears to be highly engaged because they're engaged in saying, here's how we could do it better. and runs on the critical side, which isn't a bad thing. You know, maybe some really good constructive criticism. Yet what you find over time is when you're in a meeting with this person, you can almost feel it when you walk in the room and think, oh, wow, this is going to be a long meeting. And that might be just an intuitive signal that actually what's happening is, as highly engaged as they may appear, they're actually actively disengaged and not, you know, and spreading kind of poor attitudes and emotions and that sort of thing. Actively disengaged can absolutely impact others' performance. Absolutely. One person who is actively disengaged can absolutely impact a team's performance and a team's engagement. Absolutely. The other thing that, because the opposite of highly engaged is that actively disengaged, which you probably have gotten the point, are highly entitled, which means I should be making this much money, I used to make this much money, I should have a nicer office, I need. And that's a level of entitlement that usually goes with actively disengaged employees. That might be a little, that's what I really hope that we all get as a common knowledge base, because that may be a flip of maybe how you think about that behavior. And it doesn't mean, like the caveat again is that not everybody who does these things is actively disengaged, but when you put this suite of things together, you can bet that this person is probably actively disengaged. Okay. Well, I probably don't have to emphasize too much the benefits of organizational effectiveness when we have engaged employees, but this is some more knowledge that we just want to have as a baseline with each other. So benefits of org effectiveness, we actually find that increased wellness, which is something that we actively measure at PacificSource, I bet you do too, or if you haven't, it's a very exciting area that there are a lot of possibilities to measure how actively are our employees using our health plan. And we absolutely want employees to use the health plan because they need to, always. And sometimes when we can actually see a correlation between those engagement scores going down, disengagement, and there is a correlation with what we call wellness. In fact, we see a higher utilization of the health plan for things like anxiety and depression. And so, and I don't want to get into diagnosing, but what I would say to you is that as a whole, when a population is engaged, you're going to see those rates of utilization go down. Now, and like I said, I'm not discouraging people at all from using insurance and doing the right thing and taking care of their wellness, but there is a correlation between those two. So benefits of organizational effectiveness, this is called a secondary measure of trust in the world of org development, more humor. Have you ever been on a team where you have humor and it's healthy humor? And you just can't wait to go to that group or go to that meeting because they're just fun and we have humor and we can look each other in the eye and say, you know, how are you, and exchange. We know each other and we can, you know, we can laugh a little bit and then we do really great work together. That's a measure of organizational effectiveness. And we know that in the broader subject area of organizational effectiveness, humor is a big deal. We want to see humor. In fact, it's one of the ways, as I've done cultural assessments over the years, one of the easiest ways to get the first measure of what the culture is like is to walk around, go to meetings and listen. And is there some humor at the beginning? Is there a little bit at the end? That's a good sign, very good sign. Higher productivity, employees work 57% harder. I didn't come up with a statistic. I believe this is, I mean, this is quite extraordinary. So when employees are engaged, this is, you know, some knowledge to know, and you can use all of these statistics. These are from CEB, and I'm happy to send all the sources that these came from. Employees work 57% harder if they're engaged. I mean, just try that on yourself for just a second. When you've been disengaged, what's the day like? How many coffee breaks do you take when you're disengaged? When you're engaged, you may take as many coffee breaks, but you're really excited to get back to the work, and you're excited to get back with your team. Lower turnover. This is actually, there was a study done, the staff are 9 times less likely to leave. For those of us who are engaged in human resources, those of us who are managers and know the cost of turnover, this is an important one to know. It's very, very expensive when people leave and then we need to recruit. It's expensive from a knowledge standpoint as well when we lose that knowledge. So this is a big deal. 9 times less likely? Wow. So benefits of work effectiveness: more consistent, higher customer ratings, which is a very big deal. It's how we get more business, we retain clients. Fewer safety incidents when people are engaged. Much less shrinkage or theft. There is a correlation, a pretty significant correlation between less shrinkage and high employee engagement. And then lower absenteeism, which we all know from a productivity standpoint is pretty important. It's how we get work done. So it's great when people are showing up and they're committed. Okay, so you can guess what the disengagement does. On a broad scale, the impact has a significant impact on quality of work. Co-workers, you begin to see it in the number of employee relations complaints. Just from an HR standpoint, we can absolutely see that go up when a group maybe is having some disengagement. Customers, we may see our customers begin to think about going or even leave, and that's a sign of actually disengagement in the organization. Productivity, and which we just talked about. Company performance, then all of these things, obviously, if they're all affected, then company performance starts to be affected. And then disengagement and the impact on employees' personal life, and now we're in a bit of a cycle here. If somebody's disengaged at work and they go home and they're grumpy at home, and suddenly things aren't going so well at home, and now we're in an employee can be in a pretty hard cycle to get out of. So we care about all of that, and those are examples of disengagement and the impact. Okay, well, let's talk about the birds. So this is this great film called For the Birds, and if you would like to show this to your employees, all you have to go out is go out to YouTube and type in For the Birds. It's a Pixar short film, and it's brilliant. If you want to have a fun conversation about change and engagement. And because it is copyrighted, I'll just give you some snapshots this morning, because we won't show the film this morning, but easy to grab. Go out on YouTube, it's right there waiting for you, and it's just funny to watch. But let me walk you through this in the best way I can. I have 4 slides I want to show you. So here's what happens, and this is for us to know. So I want you to actually pretend, if you're willing, to be one of these little blue birds. So here's what happens. You're like birds are. They're hanging out on the phone line, and the birds might be, we might be, any one of those birds, an employee, and this big bird shows up, and the big bird might be a new leader of the team. It might be a restructure or a redesign of the work or the team. It might be moving to a different office that big bird might represent. Anyway, all of this represents disruption and change in the workplace, and just a couple of things. So there's the big bird, and obviously he's at the end of the phone line, wants to join the little birds, all of us who have been at work and we've been doing our thing for quite a while, and then the big bird shows up. So, and I'm going to ask you in these 3 slides, when you look at the big bird, does the big bird look pretty engaged? I can see pretty excited. Pretty new leader. Hey everybody, it's great to see you. Here we go. Let's change things. And hear how we all feel about that. We were doing really well before you got here. And so we're experiencing probably resistance to change, whatever this change represents, this big bird. Or maybe you're the big bird. Be the big bird if you'd like. Looks like a pretty powerful position for a little bit. And then let's watch what happens. So my question to you is, when you look at the little birds, all of us who we've been working hard and diligently, and are we engaged? By the looks of the expressions on the little birds' faces, you might guess that we're not engaged. Actually, because we're grumpy. But actually, grumpy is very engaged. That's okay. We don't want to do it for a long time, but grumpy is actually a highly engaged behavior. And Big Bird, we know, is absolutely engaged, just thrilled to be here and can't wait to do all of these new things. So this is change. Now, what happens in the film next is that Big Bird slips. And he's barely hanging on. And that might represent resistance to change. So it could be that we gave Big Bird a hard enough time and squeezed him in just enough that he lost his balance and he almost fell off and got kind of tired. So he's hanging by his 2 claws right here. When you look at this slide, And there we all are. And this little guy looks over to his buddy, who's in the next cube, and has a look on his face like, ha, we've got an opportunity. And what do you think that opportunity is? Well, what happens is, in this case, he's letting this change, or this leader, or whatever this represents, is letting us know that they're struggling. So look at what we could do. We've got our sharp little beaks, and there are his little feet. And what happens? Well, maybe I'll leave it for you to go watch. And off they go. So are they engaged at this point? Are the little birds engaged at this point? Is the big bird engaged at this point? I would say to you, yes, they're absolutely engaged. Absolutely. Okay. And that's not really fair for me not to tell you what happens in the end, but I do encourage you to go watch it. It's funny, and the music is wonderful, and it's short. It takes about 3 minutes. But when you watch it, I would love for you to listen to the music even and watch what happens and think, this is change and engagement. As much as we want everybody to put a smile on their face and wear the t-shirt we created and the button that says, here's the new initiative and the name of the new initiative, this is really how it feels, the way these little birds look. Even though a lot of these little birds might have big smiles on their faces at work, it's hard. Change and engagement. Change on people at work is hard, just like it would be anywhere in their lives. So let's talk about change and engagement and the impact. And I feel like I'd like to just leave this up for the conversation, but I'd like to show you something, and then maybe we'll go back to this. So you have likely heard of William Bridges' research on change and transition management. He is one of the leaders in the field. And this is something that, I won't read all of this to you, but it's quite remarkable. It predicts behaviors. So if you're looking for leading indicators on what's going to happen with a group or employees, take a look at this. When you implement change on a team or to a person, and this is predictable. These are all of the stages they're going to go through, and these are all of the reactions they're going to go through. And as much as you try so hard to say, no, we don't have time for feeling incompetent, we got to get over on this side of it. Sorry about that. It's probably going to come up whether you want to deal with it or not. It doesn't have to take a long time if you put a plan in place for transition management. But anyway, so here's the change curve. So when we think about engagement, so this is knowledge for us to have a baseline about. Let's understand change so that we can understand how change impacts employees and engagement. So the first thing is, when we look at the classic change curve, you're going to see that, let me tell you a story, because it's a bit dry to look at it this way, although from my perspective, very, very interesting. But I'll tell you a story. This is a true story, and I'll do it quickly. So I have my daughter on my mind this morning because she's on her way, and just let me know right before I walked in that she landed in LA and is headed on to Costa Rica, and you can guess I'm just thrilled about all of this, and I am, but I'm also nervous about it. So when my daughter, I learned that my daughter was on the way in 1998, and my husband and I were just delighted, and had to go through several things to be sure that she was on her way and on her way safely. And so she was on her way. I mean, we just could not have been happier, and highly engaged. And then that was a big enough change for us. I mean, for any of us who have children, or we have pets, or we have, the things we do to get ready, and the things we do to accommodate these pets and these people that we love. And often when we think about change, just a side note, we often think about the change that people are going through. But the story I'd like to tell you is a story of multiple changes at the same time, which is more realistic when we talk about change. So the change was, so our little one was on the way, and about 6 months into it, we were getting ready, still really happy. Actually, we were here, she was on the way, life was great, we just couldn't believe it. And right about here, and it was about 6 months, 7 months, I got a phone call, and I was at work, and my sister said, I was in Minnesota, and she said, I'm in Kansas, and 2 days earlier she'd been in South Korea doing some traveling. She was younger, and she said, I'm back in Kansas, Dad has had an accident. Well, my dad never had a cavity or an accident in his entire life, so we knew that that was an indicator something really wasn't right. And within 48 hours, we learned that Dad had a brain tumor, and it was the worst kind you can have, and he had 30 days to live. And I remember, and so that was many years ago. The reason I share it with you is because I'll bet you have a similar story, and the details are different. But the reason I share it is to be real. When we think about change and we think about how it impacts our employees and whether they're disengaged or not engaged or highly engaged, that's what I'm talking. When I say change, I just want us to really think, and it could be 2 to 7 things that are affecting our employees. It could be 2 to 7 things in the environment that are affecting our employees. So it's a more thoughtful way to really think about what does change mean to people. So as the story goes, you can imagine then my brother and sister and I, my brother flew back from Chile. He was doing a concert, and we all came back and hung out with my dad. He was a wonderful, funny man, and I was getting ready to have Gabby. My sister, who was studying to be a nurse practitioner, we gave her the baton, which was, I have so grateful to her, but she went out to look for studies that we could get Dad enrolled in. So then we went into overconfidence. We were pretty sure that we were 3 smart people, we loved our father, and we could do something about this. And then clearly we went to the neurosurgeon, and we drove Dad to Mayo Clinic, which I don't recommend you doing, which was 2 states away. He was a good sport about it, but we were determined to get him to the best neurosurgeon to figure out if there was any possibility of anything we could do to help Dad. And the surgeon completely said to us, there's nothing we can do. So it's time to go home, and please do it as quickly as possible so he can have a peaceful passing, which I just couldn't believe it, as any of us who've been in that situation. And so we had to let Dad go, and Dad passed away peacefully about 30 days before Gabby was born. And so that's the story. And then Gabby was born, and there's a whole nother story about how we thought we were in charge, and then it turned out we really weren't. She was, and then we decided that, wait a second, she's 2 months old, we are in charge, but we're not good at it. And so that's a whole nother change story. I'll bet you've been through that with children. But this is just to make the point of and be real with you as one person to another, that change is complicated. So maybe that's just the takeaway from change and transition management. Let's just know that change is complicated, and change and the way it affects us and how we engage. If I were to have a measurement just in that period of time in my life, I would have been passively engaged. And it could be that somebody would have judged me for that, but had they known the story, they maybe would have given me a little more room. And that's why I'm saying let's be really thoughtful about what change does to people. It also is well known that if we move, here's an example, if we move people from one space to another, and you see people in tears, and you think, gosh, we're just moving down the hall, and what's happened is, in human beings, is that we've triggered, and maybe it's triggered like an experience I just shared with you. You moved me from a friend I've been sitting next to for years. I really like her, and I wanted to keep sitting next to her, and we do great work. And what people don't understand is, and I've got a story that goes with that. So that's when we talk about transition management and engagement. I hear sometimes people poo-pooing, why are people so upset? And you know, it's a chance just to let's stand back for just a second and say, let's talk about how we transition people, check in with them. There are things we can do. It isn't that we necessarily need to stop and take time for all of the deep stories, although people do that as colleagues one-on-one, but there are things that we can do organizationally that we have a little more grace with this. And in the end, it improves engagement. So, okay, let's talk about the top 5 drivers of engagement. There it is. Magic. I mean, you know, we all spend maybe tens of thousands of dollars on our engagement measurements and the plans and well, let's get back to basics and say, what is it from an employee's perspective that makes a difference in how they feel at work when change is occurring and how engaged they are? And here they are. So change. So For any of you who've been involved in a change in your organization, how much power did you feel like you had when you were in the conversation as opposed to knowing that somebody else was having the conversation and you didn't know what was going on behind the door? Being involved in the decision making of the change, including small things. So it isn't actually that everybody can be involved in, you know, big changes at the organization, but there are a lot of things that are connected to the change that we can engage employees about, that we can bring them in a room and say, how are you feeling? How shall we meet? What would you like to talk about? What would help you as we navigate this change together? And now suddenly you're engaging them in what they very realistically can begin to influence and have a decision and have control, locus of control, about their experience. And that is a top driver of engagement. Number 2, understanding career path. Often we quickly go, and I said this earlier, we quickly go to that career path means moving up. For a lot of people it doesn't. And that is perfectly okay. My dad was one of them. He actually loved what he did, and he stayed in that role for almost 30 years and made huge impact where he lived in the state of Kansas. But there is a question about, did he understand his career path? Did he understand what would happen if he stayed in the job for 30 years? Did he understand, you know, so that's a different question. I just want us to be sure we understand that when people say understanding career path, it doesn't mean for most people moving up. It means help me understand how to learn, help me understand how I have influence, help me understand how I can be a part of the decision-making process. Number 3. Of the top 5 drivers of engagement when it comes to change in an organization, coworkers make personal sacrifices to help the organization. So when I or you live in an environment where I can watch my coworkers making extra effort, that is absorbed by others who are around and inspires others to do that discretionary effort thing, that offering to do extra. We're inspired by each other when we do that. So one person can start that cycle. Top 5 drivers of engagement in an organization during change. Company provides encouragement for development. Notice in this, it doesn't say that you have to offer everything when it comes to development. What it says is encourage people to develop, and that's different. So you could have a conversation, or you could, you know, when somebody engages you like this and they say, what are you interested in and what would you like to do, and where might you take a class to learn more about that? That's engaging about encouraging development. Okay, so just to be real clear what that one means. And then the company provides two-way dialogue. When you're going through a change, I was just working with a team day before yesterday in Eugene, and the question came up, how do we begin to communicate? This team is doing some really important work for our organization. How do we communicate with all of the rest of the team members? And the other question that came up was, how do we exchange questions and answers about what is real and true about this, and how can we dispel rumors, because it's a big body of work. And so providing a two-way dialogue, what it means is somebody can ask a question and they really get an answer. Not a platitude answer, not a, you know, it's, hey, I'm really worried about my job. Should I start looking for another job based on the work that you're doing? And somebody really says, we want everybody to stay. We hope you don't go. Instead of saying, well, we'll have some plans in 3 months, you know, real dialogue. And that's the key word there, is dialogue. This category, if I were to could get in contact with the researchers, I'd say there's no category called no change, but I'll play. But that's how they designed it, so I'm not going to change it. But what I'd say is little to no change, but probably little change. So there isn't any major change going on, because in most people's lives, there's some change going on almost daily. So then watch what happens. When there's no major change going on in an organization, we can keep people highly engaged if we engage in conversations about career path and development. So when you go out and you get your engagement scores and you get a big team of people, maybe you do it that way, people do it all sorts of ways, and we say, gosh, what can we do as an organization? You know what? Teach your managers how to have a really meaningful dialogue in half an hour with an employee quarterly. How's it going? What are you interested in? Do you like work? What can I help you with? Those things. Let's do that. Understand career path. And then look how it switched. Then being involved in decision making doesn't become such a big deal. It's still a big deal, but it's not the #1 anymore. As we look at when there's little change going on, the other thing that becomes a bigger deal is, do I have the resources to do my job? And then encouraging development stays right at that same level, and then providing proper training. So you see a real shift. Look at all these. You see a real shift from being involved in decision making and personal sacrifices and dialogue to personal development, training, resources to do the job. Which is why when you see that a lot of people say we're developing a management training program or we put a lot of resources into that, that's why. Because when there's kind of little change going on, that's a very big deal, that people feel like they have access to developing and becoming better at what they do, moving up, whatever they are interested in. So I won't read this to you, but I really hope you read it, and I'll just high level tell you what this is about. And we'll get it all up here. Whoops, let me go back to rational. So rational commitment does drive retention and effort. And what is rational commitment? Maybe I'll just read this part, but the extent to which employees believe that their managers, their teams, and their organizations have their interest at heart, their self-interest at heart. So it's if you really believe when you walk into your job in the morning that somebody is thinking about me, and it could show itself in benefits, it could show itself in how gracious people are when you need a day off, it could show itself in the message that came from the CEO that's a real message, that says real stuff, you know, and isn't kind of a broad sweep of, I'm not sure what that said. You know, our CEO is particularly good at that. He'll write you a real note and he sends it out to everybody, and it's meaningful to people. It's important for us to hear from him. It drives the intent to stay. With a high rational commitment, if we each believe that, if our employees believe that our best interest is being held at heart at work, we're 40% less likely to leave, even for money. We're less likely to leave. So that's why, just FYI, if you go to your HR department, you say, hey, I want to give somebody some money so they don't leave, then you can begin to see the rationale that I'm coming from when I say, I don't know if that's going to make a difference. We'll definitely look at it because we want to be fair. We always do that check. But I don't know if it's necessarily going to make a difference to keep somebody to stay. So, impact on discretionary efforts, so that, hey, can I help you out? Can I do some extra? Can I show you the way? I've got my hands full, but I'm happy to help you. What can I be sure you're connected and feel welcome this morning? Employees with higher rational commitment, feeling like their self-interest is at heart, have a 13% greater discretionary effort. So you can begin to see we're really diving into it now about knowledge, but this is great stuff to know. Now what's interesting is that emotional commitment has a greater impact than rational commitment. So what does that mean? So this is to the extent that each of us values and enjoys and believes in our jobs, our managers, our teams, and our organization. So maybe do a gut check right now and just sit with yourself and say, do I feel this way? Do I enjoy my work? Do I believe in my teams? Do I believe in my manager and my organization? Do I go out and maybe even at coffee with just a friend and it's not even about work, and I happen to tell a story about work because I really like what I do? I'm really proud to work where I work. Emotional commitment. So employees with high emotional commitment are 33% less likely to leave the organization. The greater impact, where the greater impact comes in, is on discretionary effort. So when we have a high emotional commitment, rational is important, but emotional commitment, our discretionary effort goes through the roof. Have you ever been sitting next to somebody? I get to work in the Tigard office as well as all the offices that we have, and get to see all of our employees, which is one of the things I just absolutely love the best about my job. I get to really get out and see people and talk with people and get to know them. And in every office I've been in, often I have to say things like, where's the coffee pot? Or where's the, do you have a stapler? Because I don't carry that with me. And on the ready, people not only say, oh, sure, it's over there. What they usually happens is they stand up, walk with a stapler over and say, hey, here, you can use this. Just return it whenever you're done. That's a different kind of an interaction. That's an emotional commitment kind of reaction and interaction that I'm describing. Okay, so employees with high emotional commitment demonstrate 44% greater discretionary effort. And so you can begin to see the link. All these things are linked. So ponder that some more. We won't do any more with it this morning, but ponder that as knowledge that we all can know. That's research that's been done on employee engagement. So what makes engaging employees challenging? What makes engaging you challenging? I mean, sometimes we each have a day where we think, you'd have to bring donuts and give me a raise, and I'm just not in it today. And not because I'm not in it because I don't love being here, but maybe I'm just not in it because, you know, whatever reason. It may have nothing to do with work. Well, here's what employees said. I just love it that that's the first one that comes up. The first one that just came up for those of you listening is HR policies tie my hands. Just FYI, we have about a lot of federal regulations we have to adhere to, and we do get audited. So as much as it seems like we make these up, we don't make these up. Okay, so what makes engaging employees challenging? Here is what managers said. And now I'm going to speak to managers and what we have the power to do. Some say it's hard to engage them because I don't have a budget to reward them. I don't know what employees really want, some managers said. Employees' jobs are pretty mundane, managers said. I can't change anything that happened in the past, managers say. What strikes you about what we just learned and the knowledge, kind of the basic knowledge that now we know together in these comments? Yeah, there's a dissonance here, isn't there? There actually is a lot of control and a lot of power and influence that managers have, but they may just not know, which is why we do this employee engagement presentation and education throughout PacificSource on a fairly regular basis at team meetings and things, so that we can all know this information and really be more sophisticated about it. And then we don't have to go into this mode. But these are real feelings, and this is what people believe. So how do we succeed and be this guy? Okay, so let's be this guy. He looks pretty happy, and he's having a great day at work or something. Or he didn't lose the PowerPoint he was creating and he thought he did, or I don't know, but it could be it. So here is how, when we think about how to succeed, when I work with managers on this, one of the things that I say is, particularly new managers, is I want you to take a deep breath and relax into that you don't have to solve everything. What I'd like you to do is focus on how you can facilitate and engage with an employee and ask them questions and give them the baton to begin to create their own experience of engagement, because you can do that, and that's actually the more powerful way to create engagement. So, for example, if you have employees who are saying, or managers who are saying, it's outside of my control, I don't control the pay and benefits, I can't change the past, I can't impact how, et cetera, and I'm not even going to read that last one. So that says, HR policies, ties my hands. Focus on what you can control. Now that sounds like a simple platitude, but based on all the knowledge we just shared, now that we all have that baseline with each other about what we know, there's a lot that employees can control. And there is a lot that managers can engage employees about, so they feel that sense of control and emotional commitment and rational commitment. What would you like to do in your career? How's your job going? Do you like what you do? Tell me about it. You know, that's engaging so others can be engaged. If you think that it's hard to recognize employees, or I don't have a budget to reward them, I don't know what employees really want. The simplest thing that you can do is make your feedback and your recognition simple, and I'd add one more thing, check in with them. Go for a walk for 15 minutes. It doesn't take a long time, actually, to just say, how are you? Tell me what's happening. What's the best thing that happened the last quarter or the last month? I haven't seen you in a while. What are you doing in your work? That will elevate, and that emotional commitment, that engagement, and do it because you really want to know. I mean, that's the most powerful way to do it. Do it as a practice at first if you're not that interested, but you'll find that it actually might make you feel pretty good too. If you think that I need to focus on getting the job done, employee jobs can be pretty mundane, employees don't care about their job, then it's time for us to connect to a larger goal. And it's time for us, you know, as leaders and managers and influencers to understand the larger goal. And we're lucky at PacificSource that we have a very clear strategic plan, and it's shared broadly. There's no secret. We all know it. We can know it if we want to know it. And as managers, our challenge, and as employees, our challenge is to say, how do I connect with that? If that feels a little too big for where I do my work, then how can I have an influence? And that's a manager-employee conversation. That's also employees talking to each other and saying, how can we make a difference? Because there's that thing that we want to do, and we want to make a difference there. Connect to a larger goal. And that's some of our control. And here's another way to look at it. Feedback. So we're almost at there. We're rounding the corner, and let's talk about feedback. When somebody comes to you, and this is one of the simplest, most powerful things you can know about feedback, is when someone comes to you and says, could you give me some feedback on how I'm doing? We've lost engagement almost by 50%. But if, as managers or employees, we go to them or we see them in the hall and we say, I saw you do this amazing thing that was nominated for an I Live the Values Award. I'm actually pointing to somebody who was just nominated. I Live the Values Award. And because I got to see that. And I say, wow, tell me about, you know, what was that day like? And it sounds like that was really something, and you went out of your way and you did something extra, and just, I so appreciate you. Thank you. I really do. Thank you. And if I do that in a way that isn't, that I'm proactive about it, it's likely that our engagement, your engagement, will shoot up compared to if you had to come and ask me, I think I was nominated, do you know about that? Right? Yeah, you get the point. Timely and formal feedback can improve employee performance by 25%. So this is a little bit different than proactive feedback that include, and as it has to do with the performance we can see will go up by 16%, but engagement actually we can see it go up, which is a different stat, is 50%. Timely and formal feedback can improve employee performance by 25%. So this is, timely means somebody does something really wow, or somebody does something not so great. So let's not exclude that when it comes to engagement. And for any of us who maybe made a mistake, we know it, don't we? Oh, I made a mistake yesterday, and my boss called me, but he called me like right away, and he said, hey, I got your back. I know you didn't even know that came through. I know you've been traveling. I got it. Next time, here's what you want to do. That was excellent feedback. I was so appreciative. Once I realized what happened, I was, you know, mortified. But yeah, but also I work for somebody who's extraordinarily smart and kind, and so he was teaching me too, because I'm fairly new. So, but that timely informal, it had just happened 3 days ago. I didn't know it because I've been on the road. He just called me out of the blue and said, hey, heads up. Didn't make a big deal out of it, informal, and wow. So improve employee performance by 25%, and you can bet that on the 2018 calendar, I have it marked. Never going to happen again. Okay. Crucial elements of a quality employee engagement. Here are a couple of things that we're gonna close, and then I'll open it up for any conversation or questions that we'd like to just talk with each other about. So stories, commitment, motivation, loyalty, and trust. Well, we could spend all day on any one of those topics, but these are elements of engagement, which means when we're in our workplace and people are doing these things or they show these things, they're measures of engagement. So let me give you an example. Stories are huge, which I'll bet you're seeing in a lot of business publications, and telling stories is important, which is why I led with stories today. I love stories, and I love to tell stories, and it just makes it more real. Well, here's a story about those levels of engagement of employees that we talked about earlier in the presentation. Highly engaged, moderately engaged, and passively. 3 bricklayers, and tell me which one they are. Watch this. So 3 bricklayers were working side by side when a passerby asked, "What are you doing?" "They're at work." And the first one said, "I'm laying bricks." And the second one said, "I'm feeding my family." And the third one said, "I'm building a cathedral." So we could have a terrific conversation, and we're at 10:15, so we'll leave that for another day, and I would love it if you want to have a conversation about this. But which one is highly engaged? Which one is moderately engaged? Which one is passively engaged? It's all okay, and we need all of these people, but it's different, and it feels different. What I'd ask you as we close, and then I'll open up for just conversation and questions, is just what is your story? You know, because it begins with each of us, no matter what our role is and what our title is. So what's your story? You know, that's my story. I told you a personal story, and I told you a real story about where I work, and I just couldn't be happier right now at this time in my life. And it always hasn't been like that, but right now it is, and I'm just really grateful for that. And but what's your story? And keep it simple, and then tell your story to people, and own that story, and talk about your good fortune. It's okay to talk, not in a, you know, like as my mom from Kansas would say, not in a boastful way, but share your good fortune in a way that engages others and brings them into your good feeling. And share this knowledge that we just exchanged this morning. This is powerful knowledge. It's the best employee engagement knowledge and research that's out there right now. So knowledge first. Let's understand what we're talking about. And then let's get really clear about them in the what do we do category, the top 5 drivers. There they are. These were 5,000 employees who responded to this and said, here are the things you need to do for me. They cross-referenced it with managers and did a survey, and that's what came up. So this is solid. And then how do we succeed? And let's think about how we succeed together. There's no one right answer for everybody. It's a combination. As you can see, this is pretty interesting stuff when you just start to get into it, or it's interesting from the standpoint of that you actually have some power to do something about it. But then let's focus on how we succeed together. Let's talk. Any thoughts or questions? Thank you so much for your time today. I love this subject, and thanks for indulging me and talking about it. I appreciate it. Yes?
How long have you been doing employee surveys, and how do you communicate the results of those surveys to employees?
Yeah, that's a great question. The question is, how long have we been doing employee surveys, and how do we communicate them? So the first question is, at PacificSource, we've actually done employee surveys for years. And we've used a third-party provider. We also do it internally. So we've got a lot of mechanisms that we use. And then how do we share the information? In our case, because of our culture and because of the way our CEO, Ken Provencher, is just, he's an extraordinary man. He shares the results. He is as engaged with those results as any of us. He shares them. He does it broadly. He shares, and then from a manager's standpoint, then the managers are given their individual results, and then they can talk as a team. So we actually have the ability, like a lot of people do, to look at it organization-wide and team, so specific to team. Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah. And did you have a thought or question? Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, how do you engage a fairly new employee that is already disengaged?
Interesting. Well, I'd love to talk to you about that, because that could, you know, it could just be a million things is the first thing I'll say to you. It could be a million things. And the first and most important thing that I would do, sounds like you're in a leadership manager role. And so the first thing I do is in a private space, just sit down and say, how's it going? And I'd like to share with you how I'm seeing it's going and what can I help you with? And then point out specific behaviors. Gosh, it looks to me like you may not be as engaged as we hope you are. We're glad you're here. What's happening with you? You know, those are the, I would just keep it very informal. You might be surprised at what you hear. Yeah, that's often what I find. Yeah, right. That's exactly right. I wouldn't presume, so where I'm headed with that is I wouldn't presume it's performance related. It could just be, it could be just about a million things. Yeah. And to make the point, really make the point, I had just started a new job when I found out that Gabby was on the way. 30 days later, Dad, we received this news, and I was in my job about 60 days at that point. So it could be the disengagement is just somebody who's having a really hard time outside of work and doesn't know what to share, what not to share, because maybe they just need privacy as well. Yeah. Maybe they're feeling. That's spot on. That's exactly right. And that's often when we'll see it. And you're right, a new employee, I mean, who wants to say, I'm not really getting it? Not many of us would want to say that, would we? So we need someone who's compassionate to engage us and say, what do you need? Here's what I'm seeing. What can I help you with? And I really am here to help you. This isn't a test. Let's get in there and let's solve it. Yeah. Yeah, great questions. Other questions or thoughts? Yes. You bet.
Statistic, and I don't have the exact number, but something like 30 to 35% of employees in corporations right now are either passive or actively disengaged.
Mm-hmm.
That's not good.
That's exactly right, Tom. And I've seen that statistic. And yes. Yeah. Do you want to say that again, Tom? I dare not take this contraption off my head, but it's
Statistic shows that 30 to 35% of employees in a lot of organizations are they're either passive or actively disengaged. That's a major concern.
Major concern, yeah. So Tom is saying that I've seen this statistic that 35% of employees in organizations in the United States are actively or passively disengaged. Not good. You know, let me give you an example of and this is maybe another day, but it's another part of what I'm fascinated with, and I think would be kind of an eye-opening thing for you. You know, when we get past like 2,500 employees, there's research that says 2,500, 5,000, just because those are, you know, rounded numbers. But when you get into organizations that are 100,000 people, there was a really interesting thing that has, I mean, just fascinating from a behavioral standpoint, that happened at IBM. And IBM has always allowed for work from home and remote work and that sort of thing. And there were a group of employees who came together and said, we've had it. We want a space at work and want to come to work. Now, for any of us who've worked for several years, it used to be that that was about the coolest thing ever if you could go home and work at your house for a day or have remote work access, right? But isn't that interesting that over time what's happened is this group in an organization that's, I'm sure, over 100,000 employees has said, we've had it. We want to come into work. We want connection. We want to be with our fellow employees. So, you know, you just never know what employees are thinking, and that's why we do engagement surveys, but even more importantly, it's why we need to just be talking to each other one-on-one and saying, how are you doing? I'd love to share how I'm doing, and let's be sure we stay connected in a real way. Yeah. Other thoughts or questions? Kelly, I want to check in with you. No? Great. Okay. Good. Thank you so much, everybody. I've enjoyed being with you. And if you have any other questions, just let me know. I'd be happy to engage. Okay. Thanks.